It has been 2 weeks since the Oval Office meltdown when U.S. President Trump and his vice president berated Ukrainian President Zelensky for not showing America enough gratitude. The U.S. suspended intelligence sharing and military aid for Ukraine as a result. Tomorrow, U.S. and Ukrainian officials will meet in Saudi Arabia for talks on what Kyiv is willing to give to Russia in exchange for a ceasefire. Tonight, former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton on why this ceasefire is a bad idea. He says Donald Trump doesn't have a plan for peace. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
You're going to have some pretty good results coming out of Saudi Arabia this week.
First, the Ukrainians. They are trying to recover after that disastrous meeting that President Volodymyr Zelensky had in the Oval Office last month.
We've basically seen no plan from Trump. There is no cunning plan. There is no strategy except for strong-arming Ukraine into kind of these terms on Russia's basically, demands.
We're stronger than all of them. We have more power than all of them.
Also coming up, she's been called the most powerful woman in the world. Mexico's new president standing up for her country and not bowing before Donald Trump.
We are not extremists. But it is clear that there are some inalienable principles. We will not give up our sovereignty.
To our viewers watching on PBS in the United States and to all of you around the world, welcome. We begin the day with what is shaping up to be a crucial week for Ukraine. Decisions taken this week could put the country on a path to peace in its war with Russia. But will it be a just peace? Will Ukraine have no choice but to accept Russian demands? And how much will depend on the United States? Beginning tomorrow, Ukrainian and U.S. officials will meet in Saudi Arabia for talks aimed at ending the war, now in its fourth year. Those talks, however, will not include Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, despite the fact that Zelensky is in Saudi Arabia this week on a state visit. We do know that Zelensky has said that he's ready to sign a minerals deal with the U.S. He hopes the deal will ensure shipments of U.S. weapons along with sharing of U.S. intelligence. U.S. President Trump has suspended both. Well, I'm joined now by a man who once worked inside the Trump White House. John Bolton was National Security Advisor in the first Trump administration. He, like many from that time, left the administration on unpleasant terms. Mr. Bolton was also U.S. Ambassador to the UN, and he joins us from Washington. Ambassador, it's good to have you with us. I want to start by, if we could, getting your take on what we're seeing happening right now in Saudi Arabia. U.S. and Ukrainian officials are holding talks there this week about a possible ceasefire in the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, President Trump says that he expects very big things to come out of this meeting. What does that mean? Does that mean Ukraine will cave in to Russia?
Well, I'm very worried about that. I mean, Trump has, in effect, completely reversed the U.S. position from supporting Ukraine to supporting Russia. It's a 180-degree turn. There's no sense trying to sugarcoat it. This is a stunning reversal and a very bad idea. I suspect that what Secretary of State Rubio and his team will be advocating is, number one, that Ukraine agree to this minerals deal, which I think is almost inevitable at this point, but perhaps other terms as well, like agreeing to an immediate ceasefire. This is something that in the Kremlin they could only dreamed of getting. I don't think a ceasefire is in Ukraine's interest at this point, or the West as a whole. Whether negotiations go on or not, I wouldn't agree to a ceasefire that really could result over time in the de facto partition of the country.
You know, you mentioned this at the beginning. In just the past, 2 weeks, we have seen decades of U.S. foreign policy turned upside down. We've seen the international order shaken by the one superpower that helped create it and helped guarantee that order, the United States. Do you agree with some commentators who say that the Pax Americana U.S. leadership on the global stage, is it ending now?
No, I don't think so. I think Trump is an aberration. Obviously, he's president of the United States and he does have significant support, but what he has done, I don't think has majority support. And I think it's still a long way to the 2028 election, but I don't think this is sustainable. I think it would be a big mistake in Europe to conclude that the only alternative is to really set up the European Union as a counterpart defense organization, that NATO is finished. If you take that attitude and act like the EU is a solution, you'll give Donald Trump a permission slip to withdraw from NATO, which is not, as I say, where I think most people are. It's an amazingly bad set of decisions. There's, as I say, there's no possibility of defending them, but it would be equally a mistake to just throw up our hands and say, that's it, it's over. I think that there's going to be a backlash to it. I think Trump's general performance, including the trade war that he's trying to start on a global basis, will come back to redound against him. And so I think it's time for people to grit their teeth and not assume that the worst outcome is inevitable.
You know, here in Europe, you have a lot of U.S. allies that are re-examining their relationships with Washington. That includes right here in Germany. We spoke to the head of Germany's intelligence service, the BND, and we asked him whether he thinks the Trump administration will begin linking shared intelligence with political favors. And this is the answer he gave us. Take a listen.
We're all looking at our mobile phones every morning to see what happened overnight. So we're not immune to surprises, even the big radical kind. But for now, we can trust that we can continue our intelligence work.
Ambassador, do you think that he's right to trust the Trump administration to continue sharing intelligence with Germany without some kind of quid pro quo?
Well, I don't think you can be sure of it because Trump is totally transactional, and I don't put it past him. It's important to understand, though, that Trump has no philosophy. He doesn't have a national security grand strategy. He doesn't do policy. Everything is a potential deal to him. So that risk is always there. But as I say, it would be a mistake to conclude that because of the Trump's aberrational behavior that the entire United States has begun to move in a different direction. That's not the case. It's not a good thing that it's happening. There's no doubt about that in my mind or the minds of many others. But the bigger question here is what the overall interest of the West as a whole are, even through the difficult times that we're experiencing now and likely will continue to experience while Trump is president.
On this side of the Atlantic, Ambassador, the feeling is that when Donald Trump looks at Europe, especially Germany, he sees free riders everywhere. He looks at Germany and he sees one big welfare queen, if you will. Do you agree? Is there any truth in that?
Yeah, look, I think Donald Trump simply doesn't understand what NATO is, whether it's a collective defense alliance or even a bilateral alliance like we have with Japan or South Korea. And his basic view is just simple-minded. He believes we're defending Europe. We don't get anything out of it, and the Europeans don't pay. Now, very little of that happens to be true. It's not a European defense organization. It's a North Atlantic defense organization, and we do get a lot out of it. I think it's been a mistake in recent years by the Biden administration, among others, to talk as if this is all about theoretical pro-democracy matters. It's not. It's about basic national self-interest. It's in the self-interest of the European countries to be members of NATO. It's in America's self-interest. I don't see why there's anything wrong in saying that. In fact, when you don't say it, you're not making the strongest argument why the most successful political military alliance in history should continue.
Ambassador, the man who is expected to become the next chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, he has said that it is clear to him now that this White House is totally indifferent to the fate and future of Europe, and therefore Germany and Europe has to take care of itself. Is he wrong?
I would be very careful what he says in these matters. If he repeats, for example, what he said about Germany becoming independent, which it is already, but if he means by that basically reducing ties with the United States, that is the permission slip I fear. That's the permission slip for Donald Trump to say, well, the Europeans don't want NATO, that's fine. We'll oblige the Europeans. We'll withdraw. If that's really the result that the incoming chancellor wants, he could get it very easily. I don't think that's what he means. I hope that's not what he means. I'm not saying the next 46 plus months are going to be easy, but what matters here is the West as a whole. At least that's what the common focus should be.
Do you feel like Donald Trump is setting a trap for European leaders to walk into and to give him this, free pass to get rid of NATO?
Sure. Look, I have said, I wrote in my book about the NATO summit in 2018 in Brussels, where he came within an inch of withdrawing right then. I don't think he's given up on that. He may do it anyway. But if European actions precipitate it, then he'll be able to blame it on Europe and not on his own unwillingness to or inability to understand what NATO does for the U.S.
I know you've said you've been quoted as saying that you know what Donald Trump is going to do. So let me ask you to look into your crystal ball. We've got a NATO summit coming up this summer. What has to happen, or what will happen between now and then to save this alliance?
Well, I think people have got to focus on a longer term view here of how to deal with what is an obvious problem. And I think British Prime Minister Starmer has been trying to do that. Others have looked at it as well. I understand it's difficult. I also understand it's unpleasant dealing with Donald Trump. But again, he sees the world in personal terms. He thinks if he has good relations with Vladimir Putin, the U.S. has good relations with Russia. That's total nonsense. But if he thinks he has bad relations with Friedrich Merz, then he'll think he has bad relations with Germany. That's what we've got to try and avoid. There isn't any magic answer here. I wish there were. Yeah. As I say, it's more a matter of gritting our teeth and saying, we're going to find a way to get through this, because we are better able to protect ourselves long term against what I think is the real threat in the 21st century, which is the China-Russia axis, than if we split the West and give the Kremlin something it sought in the Cold War but was never able to achieve.
Yeah. Speaking of that axis, Ambassador, I want to play something for you. Donald Trump was on Air Force One yesterday, and he was asked whether he was concerned that Russia, China, and Iran are conducting military exercises together. And this is the answer he gave the reporter. Take a listen.
We're stronger than all of them. We have more power than all of them. I rebuilt the military. Unfortunately, Biden did nothing with it, but I rebuilt the military. But we don't want to even talk about that. I think if you look at what's happening, and if you see what we've done, and if you see where we've come, and let's see what happens with the whole Russia-Ukraine thing. I think you're going to have eventually, and maybe not in the distant future, you're going to have some pretty good results coming out of Saudi Arabia this week.
So, Ambassador, is that the president there playing down the threat from Russia, China, and Iran? And what does he know that the rest of us do not?
Well, he doesn't know anything. That's part of his problem. He didn't rebuild the military, although it did suffer from inadequate budgets for 8 years of the Obama administration and for 4 years under Biden. The big question is what is Trump going to do with the U.S. defense budget? That remains an open question, because in Donald Trump's mind, none of this really matters. As I said, he's got good relations with Xi Jinping. He'll make a deal with him. He's got good relations with Biden. He'll make a deal with him. He's written a letter to the Iranians saying, let's talk, let's make a deal. He doesn't understand the terms of the deals or what their ramifications are, and he doesn't have any strategic sense.
I have to ask you about these threats that we've heard in the first weeks of the second Trump administration. The president threatening to retake the Panama Canal, saying that he wants to make Canada the 51st U.S. state, and also saying that the U.S. should take over Greenland. Now, you know, Greenlanders this week are going to the polls. There's an election tomorrow. Trump has repeated his call for the U.S. to take over the island. Is there a Trump strategy here?
No, these are just random neuron flashes, and he doesn't think through the consequences of what he says. So let's just take Canada as an example. in the upcoming Canadian elections in a few months, up until Trump started opening his mouth, the Conservative Party in Canada had a 20-point lead on a Liberal Party over the ruling Liberal Party, which has just elected a new leader and therefore a new prime minister. Since Trump began calling Canada the 51st state, the margin has dropped to the point where the Liberals could win. This is all due to Trump, not because the Liberals have improved. With respect to Greenland, there are a number of things that could be done to take care of American and really NATO interest in keeping the Russians and the Chinese from exerting an undue influence in and around Greenland, around the maritime domain and with regard to its mineral assets. But when Trump slaps friends publicly, they react negatively. So I don't know what will happen in the Greenlandic elections. I hope that together with Denmark, we can find a way through this. But this is the nature of the problem. It does not reflect a fundamental change in the United States. It reflects purely Donald Trump.
Ambassador, one other question before we run out of time. A terrible irony of Donald Trump's plans could be that we are on the edge of the greatest proliferation of nuclear weapons that the world has ever seen. I mean, we've got now Germany talking about nuclear weapons, France talking about extending its nuclear umbrella across Western Europe. I mean, this proliferation could be carried out not by enemies of the U.S., but rather by the allies who don't trust the U.S. to protect them anymore. What has to happen for that proliferation to stop?
Well, I think this is where Europeans could focus a lot of their effort with Trump to say, look, we want to be sure that your extended deterrence, which has kept Europe free from threat from the Soviet Union's nuclear side for a long time, is going to continue. That might be a road to speak with him. But if people start saying in their conversations about getting a nuclear capability in Japan and South Korea as well that predate Trump, if that becomes commonplace, that's another reason for Trump to say, well, then they can protect themselves. I mean, that he, in some sense, that would vindicate his point of view that Europe has been a free rider. So it's very, very dangerous. People need to think about these things before talking about them publicly, and that's hard to do in the era of Trump. But it's what's done behind closed doors is a lot more likely to be successful than doing it in the full glare of TV spotlights.
Ambassador, you have said that you think Donald Trump is an aberration, and I've seen that you've been quoted as saying that you don't think he poses a threat to the United States long term. Are you still convinced today that Donald Trump is no Julius Caesar for the United States?
I mean, it's an insult to dead Julius Caesar even to raise him in the same sentence with Donald Trump. Trump's going to cause a lot of damage. He already has in 6 weeks. He caused damage in the first term, but that is recoverable. The question will be how much more he causes in the second term. And I don't think that the outcome is determined yet, but I think the Constitution and the institutions of American society are a lot stronger than Donald Trump. We've survived worse than him.
Ambassador John Bolton, Ambassador, as always, it's good to talk with you. We appreciate you sharing your insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you.